Hi, fellow Americans. My name is Brad Miller, and I'm here today to talk about Ron Paul's foreign policy. A lot of folks love Ron Paul's domestic policy, but are scared off by his foreign policy. They've heard that he's an isolationist, which is simply untrue. Isolationism actually is a policy in which a country closes itself off to the rest of the world, where no trade happens between that country and other countries. No travel occurs also. And this is simply untrue. That's the opposite of what Ron Paul believes. Ron Paul bases his domestic policy, as well as his foreign policy, on the principle of non-government interventionism. And that simply states that the government should stay out of the lives of individuals in this country and around the world. Non-interventionism as a foreign policy was the foreign policy of the Founding Fathers. The Constitution actually dictates that no wars of aggression should be fought overseas. Thomas Jefferson had a famous quote that we should have peace, commerce, and friendly relations with all nations and entangling alliances with none. I mean, that's basically Ron Paul's foreign policy. And that was Thomas Jefferson's also. John Quincy Adams, when he was president, he had a quote that the U.S. should not go around the world searching for monsters to slay. But as you know, that's exactly what's happening today. There's 5 wars being prosecuted around the world right now. There's drones dropping bombs on individual Americans overseas, and citizens of other nations. There's 250,000 military personnel on foreign soil and 900 military bases around the world. This is the definition of government interventionism overseas. So if you don't like government interventionism in your life, how do you think those citizens of other nations, those individuals who live in other countries, feel when the federal government and the Department of Defense come calling to their neighborhood? You think you're upset at the federal government. Just imagine if it wasn't just regulations and taxes you were complaining about. What if it was bombs and bullets that were killing you and your family? It's just how would you feel about that? Ron Paul also believes that, as Admiral Mullen does, that the greatest threat to national security is not China, it's not Iran, it's not the terrorists. It's actually the federal debt. 40 cents of every dollar the federal government, including the Department of Defense, spends is being borrowed right now, and that's simply unsustainable. The federal debt is about $15.2 trillion, and the current president is going to ask for an increase of that of $1.2 trillion in the next couple weeks, and that is the greatest threat to your liberty and to mine and to the national security of the United States of America. Ron Paul understands that there are folks out there who would like to do harm to the United States of America and to the individuals who live there. And that's why he does advocate for a strong military. Not one that has about $1 trillion budget, but one that is still 4 times the size of China's. So he does believe that the Department of Defense should defend America, just as the Constitution says. Because Ron Paul's whole take on the federal government is it should be cut down and chained down to what the Constitution says, which is still the law of the land. And that Constitution unleashed the energies of Americans to create the greatest prosperity the world has ever seen. Why do we want to get away from that? Why not go back to that and see a return in an environment of liberty and peace? You're going to see a return of prosperity, and that's what everybody wants. Not only in this country, but around the world. Everybody wants to see a prosperous America because we are the innovators. We are the ones who take risks. We are the ones who have built the material world and who have spread that to every nation on earth. And we've done that through free trade. And Ron Paul believes that that is a cornerstone of successful foreign policy of America, that we should have freer trade between individuals who live in this country and individuals that live in other countries. And free trade is simply when individuals voluntarily exchange for mutual benefit. And everybody wins with free trade. It's not, there's an old economic idea that when people trade, one party has to lose, and this is totally false. So with free trade, what people do is they actually have to interact. They have to talk. You have cultural exchange. People find out that everybody on earth is about the same, that we're all just human beings trying to improve our life and our family's life, and that's all that anybody is trying to do. And when people find out through free trade that everybody's about the same, then people are a lot less likely to shoot and bomb each other. The perfect example of this is Vietnam. Back in the 70s, when America was leaving Vietnam, Who could imagine 40 years later that you would be able to travel as a tourist to North Vietnam, where 40 years ago we were bombing the crap out of it, but now you can walk in the mountains and see and go through the jungles and see just the beautiful views over there in perfect safety. And that's what trade does. That's what cultural exchange does. It creates an environment of peace, and when there's peace, then you can have communication. When you have communication, you can have free trade, and when you can have free trade, people prosper, and that's what everybody wants. Ron Paul also believes that foreign aid should end. He doesn't believe that anyone in America should subsidize the life of anybody else and be forced to do so. If you want to give freely to other countries, that's a different story, but you should not be forced to do so. He also believes in ending the U.S. involvement in the United Nations, which has been slowly subverting the sovereignty of this nation for the last 50 years. So I totally agree with him on that also. So if you believe in individual liberty, if you believe in peace, if you believe in prosperity, then there's only one candidate who's been working towards that for the last 20 years consistently. There's only one candidate who bases his domestic as well as foreign policy on a bedrock of natural rights, and that's Ron Paul. He believes that everybody has a God-given right to their life, liberty, and property. This is what separates him from every other candidate. This is what separates him from 99% of the other politicians on earth. He believes that you have a God-given right to your life. You have a God-given right to choose how to live that life, and you have a God-given right to keep the production of your labor, that nobody has a claim on that. And to me, that is the only way to peace and prosperity. That when people don't live in a state of war, that you can innovate, that you're free to unleash your creative energies, not just to survive, but to thrive, to innovate, to invent, and to trade with others. So if you do believe in free trade, if you do believe, and if you want peace, if you want prosperity, then there's only one candidate that you can vote for in 2012 to be the President of the United States of America who's going to work for that to happen. And that man is Ron Paul. Thank you. Good night.